They thought they were removing a fraud from first class that morning, but in less than 30 minutes, the entire airline would realize they had just humiliated the owner's wife in front of hundreds of passengers. Claire Bennett tightened her grip around the worn leather strap of her tote bag as two flight attendants escorted her slowly down the aisle of Airline Airways Flight 27 bound for New York. The polished cabin lights reflected against cream-colored walls and gold trim while dozens of wealthy passengers turned to watch the quiet spectacle unfolding in uncomfortable silence. A man in a navy designer blazer smirked over the rim of his champagne glass. A woman wearing diamond earrings leaned closer to whisper something into her husband's ear before both of them chuckled softly. Near the center aisle, a little boy looked up from his tablet and asked innocently, "Mom, did she steal something?" His mother immediately hushed him, but not before the question sliced through the silence like glass. Claire felt heat rise into her cheeks, though she kept her expression composed. She had experienced judgment before. Years of living simply beside unimaginable wealth had taught her something painful about people. Most of them only respected what looked expensive. And Claire Bennett looked painfully ordinary that morning. Her soft grey cardigan hung loosely over a plain white shirt. Her sneakers were slightly worn from rushing through the airport terminals after a sleepless night beside her mother's hospital bed in Connecticut. Her blonde hair rested in a loose braid that had begun falling apart hours ago. Nothing about her appearance matched the polished image expected inside Airline's exclusive first-class cabin. Vanessa Cole certainly didn't think so. The senior flight attendant walked ahead confidently in her tailored navy uniform, chin slightly raised as though she were removing a problem that needed to disappear quickly. "I'm going to ask you one final time to stop causing disruption and move to the assigned seat in economy," Vanessa said loudly enough for nearby rows to hear. Claire blinked slowly. "I already told you," she answered quietly, holding her boarding pass carefully in her hand. "That is my assigned seat." Vanessa gave a tight smile that carried no warmth whatsoever. "That boarding pass has already been flagged for irregular verification." A businessman across the aisle laughed under his breath. "People fake upgrades all the time now," he muttered. Several passengers nodded subtly in agreement. Claire looked around the cabin, realizing no one intended to defend her. Not one person questioned why a calm middle-aged woman was suddenly being treated like a criminal over a boarding pass. The humiliation wasn't loud. That was what made it worse. It was polished, elegant, wrapped inside expensive cologne, gold watches, and quiet assumptions. Vanessa extended her hand toward the aisle again. "Please cooperate." Claire stared at her for a long moment before finally standing. The cashmere blanket slipped gently from her lap onto the leather seat she had legally purchased 3 weeks earlier. As she stepped into the aisle, the entire cabin seemed to watch her walk of shame in complete silence. The clicking of Vanessa's heels against the polished floor echoed through the aircraft while phones subtly lifted to record the moment. Claire lowered her eyes, not because she was guilty, but because dignity sometimes survives by remaining quiet when arrogance wants a reaction. And at that exact moment, none of them had any idea who her husband really was. 3 hours earlier, Claire Bennett stood alone beneath the towering glass ceiling of Boston International Airport while cold February rain streaked down the terminal windows outside. Travelers hurried past her pulling expensive luggage across polished marble floors, their conversations blending with boarding announcements echoing through the massive concourse. Claire adjusted the strap of her faded brown tote bag against her shoulder and glanced down at the text message glowing softly on her phone screen. "Board safely. I will meet you in New York tonight. Love you always. William." A faint smile touched her lips despite the exhaustion pulling at her eyes. She had barely slept during the past 48 hours. Her mother's surgery in Hartford had taken longer than expected, and Claire had insisted on staying overnight at the hospital instead of returning to the city. Even now, traces of antiseptic still clung to the sleeves of her cardigan. But none of that mattered to her. Family always came first. It was one of the reasons William loved her more than anything in the world. Across the terminal, several passengers glanced toward the private security corridor reserved for executives and elite clients of Airline Airways. A black SUV had quietly arrived minutes earlier before disappearing behind restricted gates. Most travelers never notice things like that. Claire did. She understood exactly how much power moved silently behind polished airport walls. But unlike many people surrounded by wealth, Claire had never been impressed by appearances. Years earlier, before meeting William Bennett at a charity fundraiser in Chicago, she had worked 2 jobs while building literacy programs for underprivileged children. Even after William became one of the youngest airline owners in the country, she refused to abandon the simple life that grounded her. No designer handbags. No bodyguards. No obsession with status. She once told William that dignity mattered more than luxury. He never forgot those words. Near Gate 14, a group of sharply dressed passengers gathered outside the Airline first-class lounge sipping espresso from porcelain cups while discussing investment portfolios and winter homes in Aspen. Claire quietly approached the counter and handed over her boarding pass. The young receptionist looked down at the ticket, then briefly at Claire's sneakers before forcing a professional smile. "You are flying first class?" she asked carefully. Claire nodded politely. "That is correct." The receptionist scanned the ticket again, confusion flashing momentarily across her face before the green approval light appeared on the screen. "Right this way." Claire thanked her softly and stepped into the lounge, instantly feeling the subtle shift in the room around her. Conversation slowed. Eyes lifted. A silver-haired man lowered his newspaper just enough to study her appearance. 2 women seated near the fireplace exchanged quiet looks over crystal glasses of sparkling water. Claire pretended not to notice. She had seen this pattern too many times before. Wealthy people often believed elegance belonged exclusively to them. What they did not understand was that true confidence never needed an audience. Claire settled quietly into a corner chair near the runway windows and opened the paperback novel she had been reading at the hospital the night before. Outside, planes taxied beneath grey skies while airport lights shimmered against the rain-soaked tarmac. Everything felt calm for exactly 11 minutes. Then the lounge doors opened sharply, and Vanessa Cole walked inside with the controlled posture of someone who enjoyed authority a little too much. Her navy uniform looked flawless beneath the golden Airline wings pinned to her collar. She scanned the room with practiced confidence before her eyes landed directly on Claire. And in that instant, something cold settled behind her smile. Vanessa Cole walked through the Airline lounge with the sharp confidence of someone who believed luxury spaces belonged only to certain kinds of people. Her dark heels clicked softly across the marble floor while gold cabin lights reflected against the polished silver wings pinned above her heart. Several passengers greeted her warmly as she passed. Vanessa knew many of them by name. Hedge fund managers. Celebrity attorneys. Executives who tipped generously and expected perfect service every time they flew. She thrived in that world. It made her feel important. But the moment her eyes settled on Claire Bennett sitting quietly near the windows, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Claire remained focused on her book, unaware that she had already become the subject of silent judgment across the room. Vanessa slowed her pace and glanced toward the receptionist at the front desk. The young employee leaned slightly closer and whispered something into Vanessa's ear while subtly nodding toward Claire. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Then came the faint smile. Not warm. Not kind. The kind of smile people wear when they believe they have discovered someone who does not belong. Vanessa approached calmly. "Excuse me, she said with polished professionalism. Claire looked up immediately and offered a small courteous smile. "Yes?" Vanessa extended her hand. "I just need to re-verify your boarding credentials for Flight 27. Claire blinked once, surprised. "Of course." She handed over the boarding pass without hesitation. Vanessa studied it carefully while the receptionist watched from behind the counter. The ticket was authentic. Fully paid. First class seat 2A. Yet Vanessa continued staring at the screen longer than necessary. "Did you personally purchase this ticket?" she asked finally. Claire looked slightly confused. "Yes." Vanessa tilted her head. "Interesting." Nearby conversations began slowing again. People always sensed tension before it fully arrived. A man seated near the espresso bar lowered his financial magazine to listen more carefully. Claire kept her composure. "Is there a problem?" Vanessa forced another smile. "There appears to be an unusual upgrade notation attached to your reservation." Claire shook her head gently. "I was not upgraded." Vanessa glanced again at Claire's cardigan, her tote bag, the exhausted shadows beneath her eyes. Everything about Claire contradicted the image Vanessa expected from Airline's elite passengers. "I see," Vanessa replied slowly, though her tone suggested she did not believe a word. The room had started watching openly now. One of the women near the fireplace whispered something that caused her friend to quietly laugh behind her coffee cup. Claire noticed it this time. Still, she remained calm. That only irritated Vanessa more. Arrogant people often became uncomfortable around quiet dignity because they could not control it. Vanessa handed the boarding pass back carefully. "I may need to run an additional verification before boarding begins." Claire accepted the ticket politely. "If that is necessary." Vanessa nodded once and turned away, but the look in her eyes lingered. Suspicion mixed with superiority. As though she had already decided what kind of person Claire must be. 10 minutes later, boarding announcements echoed through the terminal speakers while passengers began gathering near Gate 14. Rain continued, tapping softly against the massive airport windows outside as flight attendants prepared the cabin for departure. Claire rose quietly from her chair and walked toward priority boarding with the rest of the first-class passengers. Conversations hushed again the moment she stepped into line. A tall man wearing a charcoal suit looked her up and down before smirking openly. "Economy boarding is in Group C," he muttered just loud enough for others nearby to hear. A few passengers chuckled softly. Claire pretended not to hear him. But Vanessa did. And instead of correcting the comment, she simply watched Claire in silence while something cold and deliberate settled behind her eyes. Because by that moment, this was no longer about a boarding pass. It had become personal. The tension followed Claire Bennett all the way down the jet bridge like an invisible storm gathering strength behind her back. Rain hammered softly against the narrow airport windows while passengers shuffled forward carrying designer luggage and speaking in the low-polished voices of people accustomed to privilege. Claire walked calmly toward the aircraft entrance, clutching her boarding pass with steady fingers even as she felt dozens of eyes drifting toward her again and again. Vanessa Cole stood near the cabin door greeting first-class passengers with her perfected corporate smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Langston. Wonderful to see you again, Mrs. Holloway." Her voice carried warmth for everyone except Claire. The moment Claire stepped into the aircraft, Vanessa's smile vanished almost completely. "Boarding pass," she said flatly. Claire handed it over without argument. Vanessa scanned it once. Then again. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Behind Claire, the line of passengers slowed to a halt. "Is something wrong?" Claire asked quietly. Vanessa tilted the scanner toward herself before forcing a small laugh that immediately drew attention from nearby passengers. "That is what I am trying to determine." Claire felt the atmosphere shift instantly. People turned. Listened. Judged. Vanessa scanned the ticket a third time before looking directly at Claire's face. "Where exactly did you get this boarding pass?" The question landed harder than it should have. A man waiting behind Claire smirked openly now. "This ought to be interesting," he muttered. Claire kept her voice calm. "I purchased it online through Airline." Vanessa nodded slowly as though humoring a child. "Right." Then came the glance again. The cardigan. The sneakers. The old tote bag. Every detail Vanessa believed disqualified Claire from luxury. "Please step aside while I verify this," Vanessa announced loudly. Several passengers exchanged knowing looks as Claire moved quietly toward the galley entrance. A woman near row 1 whispered something that caused her husband to grin behind his expensive watch. Claire stood alone beside the cabin wall while the rest of first class boarded around her like she had become part of some embarrassing airport inconvenience everyone wanted removed quickly. Minutes passed. Vanessa spoke quietly with another attendant while repeatedly glancing toward Claire. The second attendant looked uncomfortable. Vanessa did not. Finally, she returned holding the boarding pass between two fingers. There appears to be an issue with your seat assignment. Claire frowned softly. What kind of issue? Vanessa lowered her voice slightly, though not enough to stop nearby passengers from hearing every word. The system is showing irregular authorization connected to this reservation. Claire stared at her in disbelief. I do not understand. Vanessa crossed her arms carefully. Fraudulent premium boarding passes have become increasingly common. The businessman from earlier laughed quietly from his seat. Called it. A ripple of amusement moved through the cabin. Claire felt humiliation creeping into her chest now, slow and heavy. Not because of the accusation itself, but because of how easily people believed it. Vanessa extended her hand toward the aisle. I am going to need you to relocate while we continue verification. Claire looked toward seat 2A, the wide leather chair beside the window she had legally purchased weeks earlier. That is my seat. Vanessa's expression hardened immediately. You are delaying departure. Silence spread through the cabin. Flight. Attendants stopped moving. Even the soft background music suddenly felt distant. Claire swallowed carefully before answering. I am not trying to cause problems. Vanessa stepped closer. Then cooperate. The word snapped through the cabin like ice cracking across glass. Claire slowly sat down in seat 2A instead, her exhaustion finally overtaking her patience. Gasps rippled nearby. Vanessa froze for half a second, stunned that Claire had refused to move. Then her face turned cold. Very cold. Security may need to become involved if this behavior continues, she announced. And at that exact moment, several passengers began lifting their phones. For a long moment, nobody inside the first-class cabin moved. The soft hum of the aircraft engines blended with the distant rain outside while glowing phone screens hovered above leather armrests recording the confrontation from every angle. Claire Bennett sat quietly in seat 2A with both hands folded in her lap, trying to steady the ache building behind her ribs. Across the aisle, a silver-haired passenger shook his head slowly as though disappointed by her behavior. Another woman whispered loudly enough to be heard, people always want something they did not earn. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Not from shame. From exhaustion. She had spent the last 2 days sleeping in hospital chairs beside her mother while doctors monitored complications after surgery. Her entire body felt heavy. All she had wanted was a quiet flight to New York and a few hours of peace before seeing William later that evening. Instead, she had become entertainment for strangers who knew absolutely nothing about her. Vanessa Cole remained standing beside the seat with rigid posture and carefully controlled irritation. I am asking you one final time to cooperate voluntarily. Claire opened her eyes slowly and looked up at her. I have done nothing wrong. Vanessa gave a short humorless laugh. Then you should not mind stepping aside while we investigate. Claire glanced toward the surrounding passengers. Nobody defended her. Nobody questioned why a middle-aged woman with a valid ticket was suddenly being treated like a security threat. Some looked uncomfortable. Most looked entertained. That was the frightening thing about public humiliation. Once a crowd decided who belonged and who did not, compassion disappeared very quickly. A younger flight attendant approached Vanessa quietly and lowered her voice. The gate system already cleared the ticket. Vanessa's jaw tightened instantly. Then there is a synchronization issue, she snapped under her breath. The younger attendant hesitated. Or maybe, Vanessa cut her off with a glare sharp enough to silence her immediately. Claire noticed the exchange. So did several passengers nearby. But Vanessa had already committed herself too deeply to back down gracefully now. Pride was driving the situation more than policy. And pride rarely stopped before damage was done. Vanessa straightened again before speaking louder this time, making certain the cabin could hear every word. Passengers who interfere with boarding procedures may be removed from the aircraft. The businessman recording on his phone smirked openly. There it is. Claire felt her throat tighten. Her father used to tell her that humiliation became truly painful the moment people enjoyed watching it happen. Now she understood exactly what he meant. Slowly, Claire reached for her tote bag beneath the seat. Vanessa immediately stepped back as though expecting resistance, but Claire simply rose quietly to her feet. A strange hush fell over the cabin. Even the passengers who had mocked her moments earlier suddenly looked uncertain now that she was actually leaving. There was something deeply uncomfortable about watching dignity remain intact while cruelty exposed itself publicly. Claire lifted her bag onto her shoulder and looked at Vanessa calmly. "You could have treated me with kindness first," she said softly. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. "Policies exist for a reason." Claire nodded once. "No. Assumptions do." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Silence spread across the cabin again. Claire began walking slowly toward the exit while phones continued recording her from both sides of the aisle. The clicking of her sneakers against the polished floor sounded impossibly loud. Beneath the frozen stillness surrounding her. Near row 4, the little boy from earlier looked up at her again. "I do not think she did anything bad," he whispered to his mother. The woman lowered her eyes without answering. Claire reached the aircraft door without looking back once. Behind her, Vanessa exhaled slowly, convinced the situation was finally over. But at that exact moment, the captain's voice suddenly crackled through the intercom requesting all senior crew remain on board immediately. And the expression on Vanessa's face changed for the very first time. The moment Claire Bennett stepped off the aircraft, the atmosphere around Gate 14 began shifting in ways nobody inside the cabin could yet understand. The terminal outside had grown strangely still. Airport employees moved faster than before, speaking into headsets with tense expressions while glancing repeatedly toward the runway windows. Claire stood quietly near the boarding counter holding her tote bag close against her side, trying to steady herself emotionally after the humiliation she had just endured. She could still hear fragments of laughter from the cabin behind her. Still feel the eyes following her down the aisle. Yet despite everything, she refused to cry. That was what made the scene so unsettling to the few employees now watching her carefully from a distance. Most people shouted when embarrassed publicly. Some demanded compensation. Others threatened lawsuits. Claire did none of those things. She simply stood there with quiet dignity while rain rolled down the glass walls behind her like silver streaks beneath the airport lights. Inside the aircraft, Vanessa Cole forced herself to regain composure after the captain's unexpected announcement. All senior crew remain on board immediately. The wording bothered her. Airline delays happened every day, but the captain's tone had sounded unusually tense. Vanessa walked briskly toward the cockpit while passengers murmured impatiently around her. "What is taking so long? Are we delayed because of that woman? Unbelievable." The businessman still holding his phone smirked toward the empty seat Claire had occupied moments earlier. Probably some legal issue now. But as Vanessa approached the cockpit, she noticed something unsettling. The captain was pale. Very pale. He stood near the controls listening carefully through his headset while another crew member stared at a tablet screen with widening eyes. "Captain?" Vanessa asked cautiously. He turned toward her slowly. "Who removed the passenger from seat 2A? Vanessa straightened immediately. There appeared to be fraudulent verification connected to her boarding pass. The captain stared at her for several silent seconds. "Who authorized that conclusion?" Vanessa hesitated. "I made the judgment based on irregular indicators and behavioral non-compliance." The captain removed his headset slowly. "Behavioral non-compliance," he repeated carefully. The room suddenly felt colder. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. She refused to leave the seat. The captain looked at her with an expression that no longer contained annoyance. Only concern. "Corporate operations just froze departure clearance for this aircraft." Vanessa blinked. "What?" One of the co-pilots swallowed hard before speaking quietly. Executive Command requested an immediate internal review connected to a first-class passenger removal. The silence inside the cockpit became suffocating. Vanessa felt the first real pulse of unease twist through her stomach. "That seems excessive," she muttered. The captain gave a short humorless laugh. "Not if the passenger is connected to someone important." Vanessa forced herself to remain calm. Airports dealt with wealthy clients constantly. Politicians. Celebrities. Investors. She had handled difficult elite passengers for years. But then the operations tablet chimed again. The co-pilot looked down at the message and visibly froze. "Oh my God." Vanessa turned sharply. "What?" The co-pilot looked up slowly. Ground security just confirmed executive convoy arrival through private access. The captain's face darkened immediately. "Already?" Vanessa frowned in confusion. "Who is coming?" Nobody answered her right away. Outside the cockpit windows, flashing airport escort lights suddenly reflected across the wet tarmac as several black vehicles approached the private terminal entrance beyond the gate. Across the cabin, passengers began noticing the unusual activity outside and fell gradually silent. Even the businessman recording earlier lowered his phone now. Something about the atmosphere had changed completely. The arrogance. The amusement. The superiority. It was all beginning to evaporate beneath a growing feeling that a terrible mistake had just been made. And standing alone beside the terminal windows, Claire Bennett still had absolutely no idea that her husband's convoy had already entered the airport grounds. The first thing everyone noticed was the silence. Not ordinary airport silence filled with rolling luggage and distant boarding calls, but the heavy kind that spreads when powerful people enter a room and everyone suddenly feels it at once. Outside the rain-soaked terminal windows, 3 black SUVs came to a smooth stop beside the private access entrance reserved for executive operations. Airport security officers immediately straightened their posture. Ground crew members stepped aside instinctively. Even the terminal managers who had been rushing through the concourse moments earlier suddenly slowed their pace and lowered their voices. Claire Bennett remained near the gate windows with her back partially turned, unaware that half the terminal was now watching the arriving convoy with growing tension. The glass doors opened quietly. William Bennett stepped inside wearing a charcoal overcoat over a perfectly tailored navy suit, his calm expression unreadable beneath the cold white airport lights. He was not loud. Not dramatic. That was what made him intimidating. Real authority rarely needed performance. 2 executive officers from Airline Airways followed several steps behind him carrying tablets and security folders while airport management hurried nervously alongside them. The moment one employee recognized William, whispers spread through the terminal like electricity. "That is him. Oh my God. That is Bennett." Inside the aircraft, Vanessa Cole stood frozen beside the galley entrance after receiving the captain's warning. Passengers had stopped complaining completely now. Phone slowly lowered. Smug expressions disappeared row by row as people noticed airport personnel gathering rapidly outside the gate. The businessman who had mocked Claire earlier leaned toward the window and frowned. "Why are executives here?" Nobody answered him. Near the cockpit, the captain received another message through his headset before exhaling sharply. "He is already inside the terminal." Vanessa felt her stomach tighten. "Who?" The captain looked directly at her this time. "William Bennett." The color drained slowly from Vanessa's face. For several seconds, she genuinely stopped breathing. The name hit the cabin like a shockwave. Every Airline employee knew exactly who William Bennett was. Founder. Owner. Billionaire investor. The man whose leadership had transformed Airline from a struggling regional airline into one of the most prestigious carriers in the country. Vanessa stared toward the aircraft door as realization began unfolding inside her piece by piece. Seat 2A. Claire Bennett. Her last name. The silence. The executive freeze order. Suddenly every moment replayed in her mind with horrifying clarity. Meanwhile, William continued walking calmly through the terminal while airport employees parted around him almost automatically. His polished shoes echoed softly against marble floors beneath the massive ceiling lights. He did not rush. He did not look angry. Somehow that made the atmosphere even worse. One executive beside him spoke carefully. "Sir, we are still gathering the complete sequence of events." William's expression never changed. "Where is my wife?" The question was quiet. But every person nearby heard it. Terminal managers immediately pointed toward Gate 14. Claire finally turned after hearing movement behind her. The moment she saw William approaching through the terminal crowd, something inside her softened instantly. Not relief exactly. Something deeper. Safety. William crossed the final distance between them without acknowledging anyone else around him. His eyes moved carefully across her face, taking in the exhaustion beneath her eyes and the humiliation she was trying so hard not to show. "Claire," he said softly. She managed a small smile. "You got here fast." William looked down briefly at the boarding pass still folded tightly in her hand. Then his eyes lifted slowly toward the aircraft door where Vanessa now stood frozen beside several pale flight attendants. The entire gate area had gone completely silent. William placed one hand gently over Claire's trembling fingers before asking the question that caused half the staff nearby to stop breathing altogether. "Who removed my wife from her seat?" No one answered William Bennett immediately. The silence hanging over Gate 14 felt almost unreal now, thick with panic and disbelief. Airport employees avoided eye contact. Several passengers inside the aircraft slowly stood from their seats trying to see through the cabin doorway while others lowered their phones entirely, suddenly aware that the videos they recorded moments earlier no longer felt entertaining. They felt dangerous. Claire kept one hand lightly against William's arm as though trying to calm a storm before it fully formed. "It is all right," she said softly. William looked at her carefully. "No," he answered quietly. "It is not." His voice never rose above conversation level, yet the words landed with enough weight to make two gate supervisors visibly tense beside the boarding counter. Vanessa Cole finally stepped forward from the aircraft doorway, though the confidence she carried earlier had vanished completely. Her posture remained straight, but her face had gone pale beneath the terminal lights. "Mr. Bennett," she began carefully, "there appears to have been a misunderstanding regarding passenger verification procedures." William turned toward her slowly. The entire gate seemed to stop breathing again. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. Vanessa swallowed hard. "There were irregular indicators attached to the boarding pass and I acted according to protocol." William glanced briefly toward one of the executives standing beside him. "Pull the boarding records." Within seconds, a tablet screen illuminated beside him showing Claire's verified reservation history. Full payment. Direct booking. Executive clearance priority. 0 irregularities. The silence afterward was devastating. Vanessa stared at the screen as the reality collapsed around her piece by piece. The captain approached carefully from the aircraft behind her. "Sir, the ticket was valid from initial check-in." William's eyes never left Vanessa. "Then why was my wife removed from her seat?" Vanessa opened her mouth but no words came immediately. Because there was no technical explanation left anymore. Only judgment. Assumption. Pride. Around the gate area, passengers who had mocked Claire earlier now looked deeply uncomfortable. The businessman who had recorded the confrontation quietly lowered his phone completely and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The woman who laughed near row 1 stared down at the floor. Nobody wanted to be associated with what had happened anymore now that power had entered the room. But Claire noticed something William did not. Fear was spreading faster among the employees than guilt. And despite everything, that troubled her. Vanessa finally forced herself to speak again. "I believed the reservation did not match the passenger profile." The moment the sentence left her mouth, several nearby executives closed their eyes briefly as though physically pained by the stupidity of what she had just admitted publicly. William remained silent for 3 long seconds. Passenger profile, he repeated softly. Vanessa's voice trembled now. I was trying to protect the standards of the first-class cabin. William looked around slowly at the surrounding terminal. The polished marble floors. The luxury advertisements glowing above the gates. The passengers standing frozen in $1,000 coats pretending not to listen. Then he looked back at Vanessa. You humiliated a tired woman returning from her mother's hospital bed because her clothes did not impress you. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. William continued calmly. You saw dignity and mistook it for weakness. That says everything about this airline's culture problem and absolutely nothing about her. The words cut deeper precisely because he never shouted them. Nearby, one of the executives quietly informed airport operations to suspend boarding indefinitely pending review. Vanessa looked as though her knees might give. Out beneath her. Sir, I never intended, William interrupted her gently. Intentions matter far less than actions when people are publicly humiliated. The gate had gone completely silent again. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now against the massive terminal windows. Claire finally squeezed William's hand softly before stepping slightly forward herself. Her voice remained calm despite everything she had endured. I did not need special treatment, she said quietly. I only needed basic respect. And somehow, those words hurt the room more than anything else that had been said all morning. The rain had finally begun to ease outside the terminal windows by the time the silence at Gate 14 settled into something deeper than embarrassment. It felt like realization. The kind that arrives too late to undo what has already been done. Vanessa Cole stood motionless near the aircraft entrance while executives quietly spoke into headsets around her, coordinating internal reports and emergency reviews that would continue long after the airport emptied that night. But Claire Bennett no longer seemed interested in any of it. She looked tired. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just deeply tired in the way only kind people become after enduring unnecessary cruelty. William noticed it immediately. His expression softened as he removed his coat and gently placed it around her shoulders. The simple gesture somehow made the surrounding silence even heavier. Because in a terminal filled with wealth, status, and polished appearances, the most powerful thing anyone had witnessed that morning was simple human care. Nearby passengers slowly began looking away one by one, ashamed of their own behavior. The businessman who had mocked Claire earlier finally stepped forward awkwardly, unable to meet her eyes completely. He muttered quietly, I think we all misjudged the situation. Claire looked at him for a long moment before answering softly. No. You judged a person. The man lowered his gaze immediately. Across the gate area, several employees stood frozen beneath the weight of what had unfolded publicly. Vanessa finally gathered enough courage to speak again, though her voice shook visibly now. Mrs. Bennett, I truly am sorry. Claire turned toward her slowly. For the first time that morning, Vanessa no longer looked arrogant. She looked frightened. Human. Broken beneath the collapse of her own assumptions. Claire could have destroyed her completely in that moment. Everyone knew it. One word from William Bennett and careers would disappear before sunset. But Claire had spent too many years helping wounded people to enjoy watching someone fall apart. She stepped closer calmly. You know what the saddest part is? She asked gently. Vanessa swallowed hard. Claire glanced briefly toward the first-class cabin behind her where luxury still glowed beneath soft golden lights. You spent all morning protecting expensive seats from the wrong kind of people. Vanessa's eyes filled slowly with shame. Claire continued quietly. Meanwhile, the only thing that truly did not belong there was cruelty. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the executive standing beside William remained completely silent beneath the weight of her words. William watched his wife carefully then, and despite everything that had happened, pride flickered softly through his expression. Not because she had power, but because she carried it with grace. One of the operations directors stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Bennett, shall we proceed with immediate termination protocols? Several employees visibly stiffened. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly as though bracing herself. But before William could answer, Claire touched his arm gently. No, the single word surprised everyone. Claire looked toward the employees gathered around the gate. People learn more from accountability than fear. William studied her face for several quiet seconds before nodding once. Then accountability it is. The operations director immediately began revising orders while several employees exhaled shakily in relief. Vanessa looked stunned. After what I did, you would still give me another chance. Claire adjusted William's coat softly around her shoulders before answering. Respect should not depend on who is watching. Tears finally filled Vanessa's eyes completely. Around the gate area, nobody seemed interested in luxury anymore. Not the marble floors. Not the private lounges. Not the first-class champagne waiting untouched inside the aircraft cabin. Because all morning long, they had mistaken wealth for superiority. And now they stood watching a quiet woman in worn sneakers demonstrate more class than everyone else combined. William gently took Claire's hand as boarding crew silently prepared the aircraft again beneath the soft glow of the terminal lights. And that morning, inside a place built entirely around status, appearances, and privilege, the simplest person in the room reminded everyone what dignity actually looks like.